to introduce you to something called the path to action. And it's something that we consider to be the source of all emotions. Many of us think that emotions happen to us. You might say something like, he treated me like a child and that made me mad. You see and hear something and your emotions happen. But what I'm going to suggest is that we control our emotions. They're a choice. So let me just walk us through this path to action, and it'll make a little bit more sense as we go forward. So this is a path to action. First thing that happens is you see and hear something. And so I'll just walk you through a scenario. You're working on a report, and your boss checks up on you 3 times in 1 hour offering suggestions. 3 times in 1 hour offering suggestions. What story might you tell yourself about your boss? Well, you might say, my boss is a micromanager. You might say, they're mean. You might say, they got a lot of pressure on themselves from the big boss. They're trying to be helpful. It's a wide range of stories we could tell, and we just choose one. And it's almost like we say, what's the most damaging and hurtful way I could take this? And that's the way we go. And in this case, for this scenario, we're going to pick that you decide that your boss is micromanaging and questioning your capabilities. They think you're incompetent, that you can't do this on your own. And if that's the story you tell yourself, how does that make you feel? Well, in this case, it doesn't feel very good. You feel hurt and defensive, and this leads to anger. And if you're feeling hurt and defensive and angry, how might you then act? Well, in this case, we're going to hold a grudge, and we're going to not listen or respond to our boss's suggestions. What's interesting is it all happened between see and hear and tell a story. And that is a choice. Again, we often think you see and hear something and you feel, but you see and hear and you tell yourself a story. The power is if you can tell yourself a new story, you can change that emotion. Let me give one other example just to make sure this path to action is really, really clear. Many of you probably are going through some reorganizations in your companies right now and in your organizations. And downsizing is hitting your organizations. And I was part of a major national organization that was going through a significant reorganization. All the levels of leadership were getting the boot. The head of the organization, all of the people that they had brought in, and all of their staffs. And I was in one of these high-level departments within this organization, and I was one of the few people who weathered the storm. So my boss, all my colleagues one day lose their jobs, and then the next day, the new folks slowly start to trickle in. What I wanted most was I wanted to be seen as a reliable, hardworking, go-to employee. That's what I wanted most. So my new boss comes into town. We'll call her Ann. And Ann was from Texas, and she was a very hard worker, so I pulled up my bootstraps right alongside of her and dove in. We were working till about 8 or 9 o'clock at night most evenings, and some Saturdays, and even some Sundays. And after about 2 months, I noticed that I hadn't received any feedback from Ann. And I don't know about you, but if I'm working on a Saturday and a Sunday with no extra pay, I need just a little pat in the back that just says, thanks for coming in on a Sunday. But I hadn't received a word. I didn't receive any good feedback either, good or bad. No, good or bad. What story do you think I told myself? So what I saw and heard, no feedback. The story I told myself was, my boss is insensitive and she doesn't value me. And if that's the story I tell myself, how do you think that makes me feel? Yeah, not very valued, not very motivated. And if I'm not feeling valued and motivated, how do I then act? Well, I stopped working late, I stopped coming in on the weekends, I stopped coming in on time. I started to stroll in about 10:30, and I started to live into what I feared my boss was thinking about me. Now, I wanted most to be this reliable, go-to, hardworking employee. I'm now playing into, I'm not valuable. And it all came from the story that I told. Well, the power is if you can tell yourself a different story, you can change your emotions. So enter a new coworker, Barbara, comes to the scene, and she enters, and she had a very different perspective of my boss. She would come into my office, and she would say, oh, Candace, aren't we so lucky to have Ann as our boss? And I would just think, do we have the same, do we have the same boss? And I was just dumbfounded because we clearly had the same person that we were working for, but we had totally different experiences of the same woman. And so I thought, well, let me widen my blinders just a little bit, because she would repeatedly just glow about our boss. Because when you have your blinders on and you think this is a story about somebody, they don't value me, everything you see confirms that story. So what I started to do is open up the blinders just a little bit to see, is there anything else I could see, any other data I could see? And if you go to buy a new car, all of a sudden you see that car everywhere on the road. Or if you learn a new vocab word, you hear it on the news that night. So I started to open up my eyes a bit, and I noticed that my boss did a few things that I wasn't noticing before. I went to a very expensive grad school and asked to have some of those classes paid for, way above and beyond what the regular reimbursement would be for professional development. So I went to my boss with the form. She signed off on it, no questions asked, no conversation, just boom. My boss just might value me. Then I overheard her talking to someone else about our team and that she valued me on that team. She didn't say it to me, but I overheard it. Oh, my boss values me. So I see and hear new data, can tell myself now a new story. I get a new feeling. I start to feel valued. I start to feel valuable. And I get more motivation. And my actions then change. I start coming in on time and becoming that go-to employee that I wanted to be. If you can change your stories, you can change your emotions. You just have to tell yourself the rest of the story. And stop from asking this question, which we often do, is, what's the matter with that person? What's the matter with my boss? Why is she doing this? Because she's mean, she's insensitive. And we make something called the fundamental attribution error. Back in the 1950s and 60s, they did a study. They wanted to find how people think, why they think people do things that they do. And so they'd give scenarios like your neighbor cuts you off in the grocery store line and doesn't say, excuse me. Why would they do such a thing? And what they found is that we're very bad at accurately guessing why people do what they do. We quickly think, well, they did it because they're mean. They did it because they're a jerk. Rather than, well, my neighbor cut me in the line because he had a baby in both arms and didn't even notice that I was there. So how can we instead ask ourselves this question? Why would a reasonable, rational, and decent person do this?